Theo. My name is Shane Walker, and my pronouns are they, them, their. I'm a professor at Centennial College, and I'm going to be your virtual moderator for today's session, which is Building an Equitable City. We are, or we may not all be coming from the same place, and we are all attending virtually today. But if you are elsewhere, I would like you to take the time to reflect on the land that you are a part of. For this session, and because we are in Toronto, or Toronto as it is now called, I would like to make an acknowledgement. So, as a settler of Lakota, African, and European ancestry living on Turtle Island, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the sacred traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat peoples. Indigenous peoples have been living here for more than 15,000 years, and they do continue to do so despite the violence they have faced. Today, Toronto is the home to many Indigenous peoples, including First Nations, Status Indians, and non-Status Indians, Métis, and Inuit. We are privileged to live, work, and create on this territory. And we must act with awareness and solidarity. We encourage you to educate yourself and, about the land you're on and about the peoples who were here for those 15,000 years or more on this land. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. It is also governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wapen Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabeg and their allied nations. And it is meant to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. So think about your actions and about the place you're in and what you can do to be an ally to and help with the reconciliation efforts towards Indigenous peoples in Canada. So we are basically week session 3 of Civic Lab TO's presentations. And this is presented in strategic partnership and with the City Manager's Office and the City of Toronto, and in collaboration with 8 other post-secondary institutions. And that includes George Brown, Humber College, OCAD, Ryerson or Metropolitan University, Seneca, University of Toronto, York University, and Centennial College, of which I am part. So we are part of a unique learning opportunity that is provided in collaboration with the post-secondary institutions just discussed, and including senior leadership from both the post-secondary institutions and the presidents and the city manager as well. So this group is working to this group is working towards a model of city and civic affairs and academia and a multidisciplinary approach that will help to inform policies and programs. So this year's lab, unlike last year's, is being hosted in Council Chamber, which for those of you that are there, you'll see that it is a very unique learning space. And hopefully you have had the opportunity to understand the significance of that space that you're in and the decisions that come out of it. So before I pass the speaker to our guest today's sessions, there are a few things that I need to cover just to make sure that today's sessions run smoothly. So it is being recorded. So please keep any personal information private. It will also be available online sometime in the future at www.civiclabto.ca, and more than likely your professor will send you the link or point you in the direction of the link to the recorded session. If you are joining in person at the council chamber, the request is that you avoid also joining through the WebEx virtual link. Washrooms are located, and I'm not there, so it's hard for me to point to. The washrooms are located in the hallways by the elevators. There's also going to be time for Q&A at the end of the session, and so prepare your questions, and if they are not answered for the session, there is usually a document that gets forwarded to the presenters for follow-up responses. If you're joining in person and you are sitting in the council members' chairs, there are built-in microphones, so you may use those to speak. So to do that, press the yellow button. When it lights up, it'll activate the mic. Once your question is asked, press the yellow button again until the lights turn off and it mutes the microphone. There's also wireless microphones that can be brought to your seat or will be brought to your seat. So if you do need a question and you do need the microphone, raise your hands and someone will walk up to you with a microphone. Lastly, and for those that are joining virtually, you're muted automatically. And if you are in council chambers, please make sure that your mics are muted and any other mics on any other devices are also muted. So we'll move on to the speakers. And for these sessions, there has been an incredible set of speakers that have come so far and that have presented and provided us with extremely important and valuable information. For today, we have two such speakers as well. Yolande Davison, who is the Director, Equity and Human Rights, People and Equity, and Denise Andrea Campbell, who is the Executive Director, Social Development, Finance and Administration. I believe Janice Alvarez, Manager, Equity Unit, People and Equity, will be joining in terms of the QA as well. So without further interruption from me, let's start the session. So Yolande Davison will be the first speaker. So I will pass the session on to her.
Thank you so much, Shane. I appreciate the warm welcome and setting the tone for us to start this meeting in a good way. I'm a little bit tall, so I'm just trying to get this mic right. Can everybody hear me? Perfect. Good morning. How's everybody doing? In our group, we like to do, if anyone's seen Gladiator, that's one of my favorite movies. You get the thumbs up, the thumbs down, or like the side thumb. So we usually show that to each other in our meetings as like a quick indicator. So hopefully it's thumbs up today. Pleased to be here with my colleague, Janice Alvarez, who's the manager of the Equity Unit in our team. And I'm going to let you know who I am in a second, but also pleased to be here with Denise Andrea Campbell, who's the Executive Director of Social Development and Finance and Administration at the city. As Shane mentioned, my name is Yolande Davison. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Director of Equity and Human Rights here at the City of Toronto. So for the next 30 minutes or so, oh gosh, look at yourself on the screen. That's like very like, woo. All right. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to spend some time together talking about the work of the Equity and Human Rights team and, broadly speaking, some of what hopefully will be useful information about the equity infrastructure of the City of Toronto. There are many parts to that, and how it all comes together. I would say that equity and reconciliation work at the city is definitely a decentralized model. There are places where there is a deliberate mandate, like with my team, like with parts of Denise's team, but the work is everybody's work at the city, and so that's how we approach it. So I'm gonna take us through the slides here and give you a little bit of background on, again, that broader environment, and then a little bit of information about our team and our work. Looking forward to the Q&A as well, and feel free to let us know your thoughts after I'm done. So I think it goes without saying, everybody in this room, knows that we live in one of the most diverse cities in the world. And the city that we live in has been shaped by the contributions of Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving communities for a very long time. We're living in a time where that acknowledgement is increasing, as it should. But the work has been ongoing when we talk about equity spaces and pushing for equity of access and outcomes for groups that are underrepresented and marginalized by systems. And when I say marginalized by systems, I just want to make a point. People aren't marginalized, communities aren't marginalized. For me, that's not an identity point. That's a lived experience that's created by systemic barriers. So that's when I'm saying marginalized by systems, that's what I mean. But despite that, the fabric of Toronto is very much built upon and influenced by the contributions of members of these groups. The systemic barriers that we're here to talk about continue, however, and I think it goes without saying, and it's probably a little bit trite at this point to say that the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of blown the lid off of that. Not for people experiencing systemic barriers and discrimination, because folks know what they live and experience every day, but for folks who may have a level of privilege to not have been aware of some of those challenges. And so, although it's a bit of an awkward gift, COVID has given us more space, at least in my experience, to have these kinds of conversations on a broader scale, to talk about some of the disproportional poverty that different communities exist, especially Indigenous peoples, Black Torontonians, and other equity-deserving communities like newcomers and members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. The fact that Black and racialized communities have less green spaces in the city, the fact that housing and housing-related barriers is a significant issue for members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community, but also I want to say for people with disabilities, it's a significant issue. And the fact that there's over-policing, including disproportionate rates of use of force. If folks have been following what's been happening with the Toronto Police Service, there's reporting that has been released in recent weeks and months about that. And then also, as another sort of point, that people with disabilities are more likely to experience food insecurity than people without disabilities. Next slide, please. So we're living in a complex environment where, there we go. I'm sure you've seen this visual somewhere, some version of this visual. It's pretty popular, but we're living in a context where it's necessary to give voice to these experiences, not give voice to other people's experiences, but also to create space in institutions like this in government for folks to talk about their own experiences and impact what we're doing to ameliorate them. But this visual is like something that I think is, useful in the context of the work that we do, because there's often a conflation between equality and equity, and then justice is usually not even sort of part of the discussion. Of course, equality is more about treating everybody the same, making sure everyone is at a level playing field, as the saying goes. That doesn't recognize that not everybody's at the same starting place. Equity is about acknowledging that people have varied needs, varied lived experiences, varied outcomes, and that those needs and experiences have to be addressed specifically in order for them to be able to have access to what others may have access to. On the last picture, you'll see that really what we would like, we have got a baseball field going on here. So of course, equality is, everyone's standing on the same box, looking at the game. Some are short, some are taller. It's not working out. In the middle, folks have the height of box that they need so everyone can see over the fence. But ideally, we want to be in a place where there is no fence and that fence is dismantled. So I would even add that beyond equality, equity, and justice, the next thing that comes after that is liberation. for equity deserving communities, Indigenous and Black communities. Next slide, please. So in terms of the City of Toronto context, who are we talking about when we talk about equity deserving populations? The city recognizes in the work that we do the experiences of Indigenous peoples, Black communities, and that those are distinct experiences. And we also recognize specific equity deserving groups in a particular way, as you can see on this slide. Again, Indigenous peoples, Black people, racialized groups, women, to us LGBTQ+ community members, persons with disabilities, undocumented individuals, immigrants and refugees, and persons with low income, as well as youth. So broadly speaking, when we're in a city environment or in the context of the work of the city and you hear the term equity deserving group, that's who we're broadly referring to. We understand, of course, intersectionality is critical to this work and what we're doing, so we're going to talk about that later, but I just wanted to make on that, a note on that. And again, just as a sort of grounding piece, there's a little bit of a definition at the bottom of the slide about intersectionality and what that means, and that it speaks to the compounding barriers and sources of oppression that impact access to opportunities and outcomes for people with overlapping social identities and locations that are subject to marginalization by systems and barriers like patriarchy, ableism, and so on. Next slide, please. So in terms of equity in practice at the city, there are, I guess, the two big considerations that are how are we doing what we do and what happens as a result of that. So you can see on the slide that, of course, how we do what we do is all about the process. There are structures that the city has in place. There are approaches that we take, modes of operation that we have in our different parts of the organization to try to get to some of the goals that we've got. Primarily that Toronto is the best place to live that it can be for the people who live here, for the residents of Toronto, and that people have access to the things that they need to be well and healthy. On the other side, of course, outcomes is about looking at all of these efforts to dismantle these barriers. Where are we going? How far have we gotten? How far do we have left to go? What are some of the shared outcomes based on intersectionality, interlapping and overlapping identities in the work that we do? Next slide, please. So although I'm running sort of like through a pithy little deck here, like I think it goes without saying that is very complex work. Equity, work, social policy. I'm not sure sort of where everybody in the room is coming from in terms of what your focus is and what you're studying in school and what your interests are, but doing work in any sort of way when it comes to social policy and work that is focused on outcomes for populations that are underrepresented and underserved is complex for lots of different reasons. Some of that has to do with the need for culture change and capacity building and people's understanding of the issues. Some of that has to do with the level of interconnectedness of experience and how to sort of break that down to actually get at better outcomes, and understanding that it's an evolving conversation and piece of work. And a lot of the work that is being done and has been because of the advocacy of folks belonging to community who have been affected by that. You know, we have a human rights code in Ontario. People in, you know, hopefully this is true, but people in Ontario can largely live in whatever community you want as long as you have the means to live there, because we have legislation that was put in place after advocacy in the 40s, 50s, and 60s by the Black and Jewish communities in particular around that and around housing discrimination. So a lot of the things that we do in the context of work in government are a result of the hard work that has gone before and that continues in community. From a municipal perspective, there are different things that we're navigating in this complex environment. So distinctions, again, even talking about intersectionality, the other side of sort of reference of that or thing to consider is that no community is a monolith. There isn't one experience, and there's a need to, again, in terms of an equity perspective and a reconciliation perspective, consider the unique experiences and needs of people within communities as well. How we talk about these things, the language we use, the way we define what we're doing is also consistently and constantly evolving. and trying to get better at how we actually give voice to the work. The breadth of services that the city delivers is quite extensive. And a lot of that work is facing the public. And it's, I would say this, the city, the municipal context in general, not the city of Toronto only, is very much the first line of access and sight for people who are going through different kinds of challenges in life or who need different kinds of supports. So again, you may be interfacing with the city because you need something on the children's services side, you need some support. You may be experiencing income, precarious income or lack of income, lack of employment. You may be experiencing community safety issues that, you know, need to be addressed. So there, housing, there's all of this kind of goes together, and all of those have to also be considered and broken down from an intersectional perspective. And then again, we can't really talk about this work anymore without talking about COVID, as much as we might, some of us might be tired of hearing COVID-19. It has changed the landscape significantly. Not again because people didn't know what they were experiencing, but because those experiences have deepened and become even more entrenched and multi-barriered because of the outflow of the COVID-19 pandemic and the access to resources, or the lack of access to resources that folks have had. Next slide, please. One more. Thank you. So I mentioned earlier that the City of Toronto has a decentralized equity and reconciliation infrastructure, meaning we don't have like one central place where it's like, it's your job. You got to fix all these problems. You guys are doing all things related to equity in all areas of service for the City of Toronto. There are, again, places of expertise like my team, like Denise's team, but it is everybody's work, and there is a structure that supports how we do that work to enable everyone in the city to uphold that accountability and obligation. So what you can see on this slide here are some of the tools and supports that we have to, I guess, that make up this structure. There are several action plans, some of them you may be familiar with, that are, some of them are, you know, the results of direction from council. Many of them, again, are the results of advocacy from community. But there are strategic plans in large part, and implementation plans that give us guidance and structure in how we would move forward on certain issues and what we're actually trying to do, what the issue is that we're trying to solve in terms of equity. So most recently, you may be aware that this summer, the city's first ever reconciliation action plan was adopted by council, which is huge. Again, many years of advocacy to get to that. The gender equity strategy, the city's first ever gender equity strategy, is the responsibility of my team. And we look forward to bringing that to the public space when the time comes. And again, many years of community advocacy have led to that. We have the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Action Plan, which maybe Denise will speak to a little bit more. We've got other stuff actually also that I think this is important to mention, that as much as a lot of what we do is about how people outside of the Toronto Public Service experience city services, we also need to be thinking about how people inside of the Toronto Public Service are reflecting the demographics of the city that we work in and the diversity of that city. So workforce equity is also a part of the mandate of Equity and Human Rights and the People and Equity section in general that we are a part of, in terms of pushing the organization to achieve a level of reflectiveness and representation. And then there are lots of other pieces that come under that. Divisions have their own priorities, their own work, their own mandates that they're advancing. We have support units that generally are the people, as I mentioned, in this decentralized structure that are pushing and advancing and demonstrating the leadership on this work, working with other parts of the city. So again, Equity and Human Rights, as Janice and me and 4 other wonderful people and our teams. The Indigenous Affairs Office, the Poverty Reduction Strategy Office, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, and Social Development Finance and Administration as a whole, as a division. The other side of this is, okay, if we want people to take action on these action plans, we've got teams that do that. We also need to make sure that folks have the facility in terms of the understanding of the issues and the capacity to do the work. And so that's where tools, resources, and training come into play. There's a range of things that are available to people working at the city and hopefully where we get to is a point where equity and reconciliation considerations are a part of regular business all the time, 24/7. That's the goal, and that's what we're working towards. But these tools help us on the journey. For instance, the Equity Lens tool, which is the work of the Equity and Human Rights section, my team, that really takes, if you're working on a policy or a program issue or a service delivery issue, it's a tool that can take you through the things you should be thinking about, the questions that you should be asking to understand the intended and unintended and neutral, I don't know if they're ever neutral, impacts of what you're planning or what you're thinking, especially for Black, Indigenous, and equity deserving populations. And we also have some human rights resources as well. The Human Rights Office at the city is part of Equity and Human Rights. So data is, I think, one of the last frontiers in the equity conversation. There's a lot of work that's happened over a long period of time. I think where government in general hasn't been the greatest is capturing what has been happening from a data perspective, specifically data about who people are and how they intersect with city services or sociodemographic data. So the data for equity strategy at the city is trying to change that, trying to bring the organization to a place where we have a consistent sort of framework for how we think about data when it comes to equity and how we use it. And we also have other data tools, like on the internal side, as I mentioned, the representativeness of the organization is important. So we have internal tools like a workforce demographic survey, which is called Count Yourself In, that allows staff members of the City of Toronto to identify themselves as they feel is appropriate. Then we have policies and processes. The structural side of things, this is a government, so this is a legislative environment, a policy environment. There are other things that drive and impact our work, of course, in addition to the political process. And so there are some examples here. One of the things, I'll just pick one of them because I don't want to run out of time here, but one of them that I think is really relevant at this point in time is equity responsive budgeting. That's essentially a piece of work that's been around for about 7 years now, but essentially the idea is that when the city's making decisions on budget and how resources are going to be allocated, financial resources, what are the equity considerations that people are thinking about, and how is that impacting choices that are being made about fiscal allocations? And then the last thing is advisory bodies. And I guess, again, as I mentioned, the importance of ensuring that there are avenues of input for people from community into the city, and the community and council advisory bodies, I should say, are a big part of that. There is the Accessibility Advisory Committee, the 2S LGBTQ+ advisory body, the Aboriginal Affairs Committee, and many others. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to just take you through a little bit of a run through who we are. Equity and Human Rights is the team that I'm a part of, as I mentioned, and Janice is as well. So I'm the director. I work in a sort of dotted line relationship you can see on this slide with the diversity and inclusion team. That team is focused very much on workforce equity within the Toronto Public Service. So again, initiatives that are meant to look at bringing more folks into the organization who reflect the population of Toronto, employing more folks who represent diverse backgrounds. But I also have, as you can see at the bottom there, 5 teams that we work together with different mandates, but with a common purpose around advancing equity at the city. The Human Rights Office is focused on, it's a little bit different than the other 4 teams, but the Human Rights Office is sort of like an arm's length body that both internally and externally addresses human rights issues that are brought forward by members of the public or members of the Toronto Public Service, and addresses inquiries and complaints in that regard, accommodation issues when it comes to lots of matters like disability and other factors. The Equity Unit, which Janice is the manager of, focuses on, I don't even know, I think everything under the sun when it comes to the work that we do, but service delivery equity and service equity is a primary focus of the mandate of the team. In terms of working with the tools that we've got and with the partners that we've got, and looking at, again, experiences that can be improved as far as how people interact with the city and the services that they receive. The Accessibility Unit is focused on compliance with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the city's multi-year accessibility plan, and lots of other pieces. The Gender Equity Unit is working on the city's first gender equity strategy, as I mentioned earlier, and we have our Data for Equity Unit, which is driving the Data for Equity strategy that I just spoke a little bit about. So this slide just gives you a sort of quick description of what we do in terms of our focus on trying to be evidence-based, outcomes-focused, providing strategic advice, incubating ways of doing things, and then influencing the organization and trying different approaches, working lots with our partners. Next slide, please. So in terms of how we do what we do, again, a big part of our focus is building capacity. We recognize that everybody is at a different place on this spectrum. Some people and some divisions and some service areas, some teams are very versed in this work and others have some room to grow. So the tools that we work with and the tools that we develop help the organization to build that muscle. The advisory capacity that we provide is really about informing decision-making from a strategic perspective. Some of what we do is about compliance, like I mentioned with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. Some of it is about all of it really, but we're specifically trying to strengthen accountability in certain ways, like through the budget process and the equity responsive budgeting piece that I mentioned. And then the last thing that we're really seized with is trying to align, and Denise and I talk about this a fair bit, but trying to drive a level of alignment in the organization with all the pieces of equity work that are happening and make sure that we're striving for common objectives and outcomes. So this next slide, thank you, is just a quick one on sort of, I think we kind of covered some of this, so I think we can move on to the next one. Thank you. So this is the gender equity units and what the team is focusing on. Actually, sorry, can we go back to the previous slide? I think I got lost in my slides for a second there. Thank you so much. So this is a little bit of a drill down description on the equity unit and what the team does. Again, as I mentioned, the Equity Lens tool is the purview of that team. Equity responsive budgeting, count yourself in the demographic survey that is filled out by employees of the city. So these are some specific ways in which service delivery and service equity are being advanced by the team and embedded across the organization. Next slide, please. The Gender Equity Unit is a newer team that's been around for about a year. And again, in recognition that women, girls, and gender diverse people are more than half the population of the city of Toronto, there's a need for a gender equity strategy. And there's been lots of political and community advocacy on that. And the two key objectives of that work are to reduce gender inequities across municipal government and our services and improve the quality of life for women, girls, and gender diverse residents of Toronto. The Data for Equity team, again, is focusing on the Data for Equity strategy, bringing some alignment to equity data and the city and how we use it. And there are four sort of, I guess, priorities that we've got in that space in terms of being able to use data to drive decisions, to design solutions and address tough policy and program issues, to support education and capacity building in the organization, and also to provide advice. And lastly, just one quick profile on the accessibility unit. As I mentioned, the accessibility unit has a mandate around compliance when it comes to accessibility and disability and what the city is doing in terms of our organization, but also provides quite a lot of support from a community perspective in terms of council advisory bodies, as well as ensuring that we continue to think about our evolution from an accessibility perspective as well. For future opportunities where we want to, or where we're trying to sort of focus all of this stuff that I've been rambling on about for I don't know how long now, is getting to a shared understanding of equity within the organization and also within, the environment or ecosystem of the partners that we work with, and that, and understanding that is inclusive. Getting to a place where, again, this is integrated into the regular business of the city in a very robust way, and continuing to connect with community, continuing to create channels of not just engagement, but partnership and collaboration, and thinking about that data collection and use and disclosure opportunity around sociodemographic data. So I may be over time. I don't know if I got the signal. Am I good? All right. But that's what I have for you today. I hope it was helpful and useful. I hope I didn't talk too fast. Sometimes I do that, but happy to take any questions. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Denise. Sorry, Yolanda, my apologies. That was an incredibly informative set of information. And I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. So we're going to move on to the second speaker in the series for today's session, and that'll be Denise Andrea Campbell, Executive Director, Social Development, Finance, and Administration.
Thank you so much, Shane, and good morning, everyone. I've had the opportunity to address groups in council chambers before, but this is one of my first times doing it in a hybrid way, so fun times. thank you so much for including Yolanda and I in your learning journey. I think the work that we do is pretty important to the health and vitality of Toronto. And I think how we do it and the kinds of people who are part of our teams to advance this work in the organization is among some of the most interesting, exciting, and important things that the city does. So I hope not only do you learn about the work that we do, but that hopefully it inspires a number of you to see yourselves making a career in municipal public service. So I've got about 30 minutes as well. I really actually want to thank Yolande because she's done a lot of the level setting. So I get the opportunity to jump from what she's done, and I really appreciate that. I'm going to walk through my division structurally and the services that we do, but spend more time digging down into a couple examples that helps you understand how we do it and why we do it. And then finally, just moving to that piece about a career in the public service, my own and others that are very much part of my incredible team. So I want to start here in terms of this small but mighty division. I call it Tiny Giant, the Social Development, Finance, and Administration Division. It's a very odd name. And when I came into the city in 2004, oh my goodness, I struggled. Social development I got, but what's this finance administration part? I'm going to come to that. It all makes sense, but it's a constant explanation. So here is our mandate. So Tiny Giant with a big mandate within our organization. We drive transformative change to achieve stronger, safer, and more resilient communities and neighborhoods in Toronto. We lead the city's place-based, population-based, and system-level strategies that are about making the city a more equitable city to live in. I often joke that SDFA, that's what we're known as, more colloquially in the organization, where if you know nothing about the city, nothing else, know that acronyms is a big deal in our organization. So SDFA, I always joke that we have the Create World Peace mandate because when council has complex issues that often are about how do we improve livability, quality of life, opportunity for residents, and they're not totally sure where to put it, they give it to us. And they do that because over time we've built an ability to move complex issues in a way that a municipal government can to have impact in real people's lives, ultimately. And so here's some examples. Make Toronto safer. Reduce poverty, solve systemic racism, embed and improve in neighborhoods, ensure youth make it to adulthood alive, healthy, productive, and employed, seamlessly settle refugees and integrate newcomers, remake Toronto community housing so it's better for the tenants that call it home, and reform the police. So those are a list of many of our files. And to Yolande's point, we never do any of that on our own. There are divisions and agencies within the city system, and then obviously more broader than the city, who have particular mandates that are about pieces of this work. Our job in SDFA is to bring it all together where we're centering residents and communities and ensure that we are driving action that's effective, relevant, meaningful, and ultimately accountable. It's a lot. And I came into the city on a 2-month contract from community activism. And I have to say, I will come back to this a little bit later, but I stayed 18 years now because I found little dissidence between my own personal and political beliefs and values and the work that I get to advance and lead on a daily basis in this organization. And that's an incredible thing to be able to say over one's career. I was up really early and I was on Facebook and I saw this little ad pop up and it said that working hard for things that are unimportant is stressful, but working hard for things that you value is passion. And that's surprising because it was about a hair thing. I have no idea what that had to do with the profound comment, but the profound comment stuck to me because it really is, I think, describing the work that many of us who advance equity here in this organization believe. Next slide, please. So I know you started your sessions here with the city manager and that Tracy showed you this slide. So it's busy. You don't need to go in any detail other than there is on the left side, right side. Oh, yeah, on that side. Thank you. See, they're so great up there. Thanks. That side of the organization is community and social services. Those, I don't know how many, I think that's 10, 12, I don't know, we've been growing. Sets of divisions range from fire and paramedics to public health, parks and rec, children's services, and my own division. And there's a number of others in between. That whole organization map describes an organization of 35,000 employees. Beyond this, when you think of the entire city system, if you add libraries, zoos, police, and those other agencies and corporations, we're an organization of 55,000. So the ability to really impact what is possible for Torontonians, the quality in which those opportunities exist and services is actually quite profound. So the little blue star is my little piece of that very large system, and that's where we sit. Next slide, please. So this is the high-level organizational chart for Social Development, Finance, and Administration Division. You'll see, so as the division head, here at City, we're called a whole bunch of different things. Some of us are executive directors, some of us are general managers, and some of us have special titles like Chief People Officer or I can't think of any others, but there are a bunch of those. But essentially, the role is very similar. Our job is to lead the division of which we're responsible for and ensure that we are meeting council direction and mandate. Under me, there are 5 areas within the division. So community resources is the first directorate. Community safety and well-being is a new directorate that I'm creating given the rise in the amount of community safety work we're doing. Human service integration joined us right before the pandemic. So it's the newest area in the division of about 100 people. Social policy analysis and research. And then finally, financial management. So 5 directorates that creates our division. There in 2022, we had a gross budget of 95 million and staffing that we've worked to increase. So in 2011, we were at just over 110 people. And in the last 3 years since I took this position, my mission has been to right-size our division to meet council's mandate. We're now at 314 staff. Next slide, please. Oh, you're already there. Great. So this is a different view of the division. It's about our service view, if you will. So not how we're organized functionally, but what are the types of things that we deliver. The first 3 that are in green are highlighted because they're the ones that are the most front-facing. They are the most resident interacting sets of services and programs. So under community and neighborhood development, you'll see community development staff working in neighborhoods across the city, community funding delivery. We are a huge grantor, and that's an important part of delivering on the equity and well-being work of the city. A unit and set of functions around community infrastructure. So that is spaces, hubs, neighborhood revitalizations, all of that work. and then youth development in terms of youth employment, leadership, and all of that. There is community partnership and investment funding. So in my division alone, we grant $25 million annually to a wide variety of community agencies in order to enable them to do the important work that is so critical. And if COVID, one of the key lessons is how important that infrastructure is to keeping the city going. Human service integration, that work is about ensuring that communities, residents who require income supports, so everything from childcare subsidies to Ontario Works to housing subsidies, that they have one door in to call, multiple divisions deliver those particular services. We are the front face to ensure that there's seamless, accessible, supportive access to all of those things. Social policy and planning, financial management, and corporate leadership. The blue, that financial management and corporate leadership are internal facing services. Certainly where the rest of my division takes advantage of the financial management services, but we're unique in that the corporate leadership part, so our deputy city manager that supports 12 divisions within community and social services, his budget sits in our budget, and we're kind of his right arm to advance many strategic things. Our financial management section then supports not only our division, but the divisions within our service area, those again from Parks and Rec to children's services and now fire and paramedics. So we always have had a role that is not only about looking outwardly to how we serve Torontonians, but how do we support our organization looking across. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's just the structure stuff to get you anchored on who we are and the work. But let's talk about the work. Yolande talked very clearly about what equity means in the organization and the complexity of who we work with and the types of issues that we are grappling with as a city. This is up here because over the years, I always struggle to think about how do we talk about this work in a way that can put it in some boxes so it's easier to understand, recognizing it crosses everything. But one of the ways in which to think about this work, and it was thanks to an invitation I had to speak at U of T a number of years ago about policy in how we advance policy. And I started to think about our work related to people, places, and systems that we develop in SDFA working across horizontally, so that means across our organization, and vertically, meaning working from in our organization to out in community to across to other institutions. And when I think about the types of strategies that we facilitate, we are the facilitator. And we're the project manager but it's really often an all of government or all part of government, part of community, part of other institutions approaches. So we don't own any of what we do on our own. There's multiple parts advancing. But if we think about it, the things that I've listed up here or put in graphical form are strategies. It's about the lens that predominates any one of these strategies. So up there, you've got the Toronto Newcomer Strategy, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Action Plan, and the Youth Equity Strategy. Those speak to places, neighborhoods. They also speak to system change. However, the sort of entry point, if you will, and the primary focus is about who's impacted and who do we want to make the city better for. And so it's really about the people. Then you'll see in the second tranche places. So there's the Toronto Strong Neighborhood Strategy, and there is a article, because it's not exactly a strategy like the others, for the community mobilization plan that we developed for vaccinations. Why is that up there? Because based on public health data, we recognized early on when COVID started to happen that the impacts weren't widely shared across all Torontonians. Obviously, things like race, poverty, where you live, those things had an impact, and we started to see massive rates of COVID infections in particular communities. And then we started to develop and advance an equity-based strategy in order to target our work, both in terms of responding to everything from food and violence and rise in mental health to ensuring that we have higher vaccination rates. So that's there. That's about place, is the primary driver in that work. And then finally, you see the poverty reduction strategy to prosperity and SAFE-TO, which is our 20-year community safety strategy. And those are under the systems bucket, because while they certainly are about people, and they definitely integrate with place, they're really about how do we fundamentally shift practice, policies, systems, culture, in order to make a fundamental difference on those. Next slide, please. So as we move forward, again, if you think of the slide that Yolande had up about the equity infrastructure, I just highlighted some of those action plans or strategies. This slide is just sort of an easy way to talk about some of the things that we activate or use or leverage in order to make change on these types of issues. So under activating people, you'll see here community consultation and engagement. We do nothing without working with community. The issues come from them, often the ideas come from them, and they very much need to be a part of all the detail in order that we are making it relevant and impactful. Lived experience advisories. So we go from consultation to ongoing participation and co-leadership, and that's where lived experience advisories come into place. For example, poverty reduction strategy, low-income people have been the backbone of that work for us, including the accountability pieces moving forward. I'm not going to go through all of them, and Yolande touched on some, but just to know that we set up multiple structures, some internally, some externally, some expanding internal and external, in order to ensure that all those who are impacted have a seat at the table and are helping define the work. Activating resources, so that's using our tools as community funding of grants, community space, employment, programs and services, equity responsive budgeting. These are the kinds of tools that we have as a municipality, on top of, obviously, bylaws, intergovernmental advocacy, these types of things in order to advance our priorities. And then finally, in terms of activating policies and systems change, you'll see here the importance of research, data, and collaborative analytics, policy development and implementation. That's how we talk to council as staff, is really through council reports, policy creation. And then new models and service delivery, and then training and culture change. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take a couple minutes to just ground everything that I've just said into some real life examples. I was going to say some of these are my favorites. I guess I'm not supposed to say that because they're all my favorite. However, I think these ones are relevant and may resonate with you. So the first one, in terms of activating people, I chose the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Action Plan. Now, I'm a mother of 4-year-old twins, and I have to say this was my first baby, this one, because as somebody, we'll come back to this in a minute, but I certainly have had a long career driving a number of change here in this organization. Everything from strong neighborhoods, where we're investing in neighborhoods, to that youth equity strategy in 2014, to work on newcomers. And this one, because I'm a member of the community that's impacted, was more challenging than perhaps any of the other work I'd done up until that date. And so it called on me and called me out as a Black person leading in an institution that has often failed Black people, and challenged me personally as well as professionally. So having people come and say, and then me saying, trust us one more time, this time is going to be different, after years and years and years of research, activism, and promises, some made, some kept, some discarded over time, is a really difficult thing to do as a member of an equity deserving community when you're in public service. But the backstory here quickly, you'll recall in 2016, Black Lives Matter did an encampment at police headquarters. Community pressure is often the driver of what things end up in front of council and how city staff prioritize. The encampment was particularly effective, I would say, and Mayor Tory had a particular interest on responding to one of the asks of BLM, which was to have a town hall. Luckily for me, and I think for us, honestly, he asked me for advice and guidance. And I said to him that Black communities don't want a town hall. What they want is systemic change. And that if he trusted me, we could go on a journey to learn together, to work with Black communities, and to come up with a plan where we could lever the municipal tools in order to make some change. And that's what we did. So the reason I have this under activating people is because this work really built on 40 years of research and reports, 40 community conversations that we engaged with a variety of Black organizations so that people that they trusted could have voice in this plan. And then once council approved the plan unanimously in December 2017, then we created the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. There's a partnership and accountability circle of community members. In 2020, council directed us to create a council advisory body around these sets of issues. There's a Black staff network, and in community among agencies, there's a Black resilience cluster. These things are all about structuring our ability to listen to people constantly throughout a journey of fundamentally changing our organization to recognize and support Black communities given the history and the current manifestation of confronting of anti-Black racism. Sorry. Second slide, or next slide. Second example is a recent one. Council in July 2021 adopted SAFE-TO. This is a comprehensive 10-year action plan for us to, one, meet provincial legislation that required all municipalities in Ontario to create a community safety and well-being plan. But maybe more so than the legislation, it really is about us as a system rethinking our approach to community safety, moving from it's all about emergency response and enforcement, which is kind of downstream kinds of responses, to centering social development kinds of initiatives, prevention and intervention, and thinking about safety, not in terms of just crime and punishment and enforcement, but in terms of wellness and a vitality of communities. So this one's here because after doing tons of community engagement, which is always what we do, in order to build strategies, including doing it inside the organization, I'm obviously a huge believer of engaging residents and institutions in our work, but I've learned over time in this organization that if you want to be effective, we need to spend as much time engaging across our busy organization so that they can understand the issues, they can own parts of the solutions, because ultimately, to Yolande's earlier point, the work to deliver this is everybody's work within our system. And if they're not involved, they just feel done to, and they have many other priorities, and this may not make the top. So internal engagement. I put this here because to make this one successful, it requires us to understand what do we already have already. So the wheel that's there, we did an analysis. We have over 60 programs, strategies, services that are all trying to advance safety in some way. And so this isn't about adding a new thing on top to add another more 50. It's about taking those existing 60 programs and services and tools and making them work towards our new aims and integrating them. And in some cases saying that's not good enough no longer. Public resources are finite, so we need to move on and we're going to do something different. It is about rethinking the system. And to do that requires reusing existing resources. And yes, it requires getting some new ones from council. They gave us 12 million this year to get started. And then working with the other orders of government in order to get more, in order to move parts of the system, invest in communities, and help integrate across everything from education, justice, as well as policing with public health and a variety of other community services. And then my final example, next slide. This one is my new favorite baby. And so in June 2020, in the aftermath of the deaths of George Floyd in the US and Regis Korchinski-Paquette here locally, we all remember the movement for the global racial reckoning. And as part of all of that, Council in June 2020 had a robust debate around changes that we needed to make in policing here in Toronto. 36 directions were adopted from Council. And one of those directions, 36 were adopted. Many of them were about city. I was tasked to create a policing reform unit, so now that's a new responsibility. But one of the things was about creating a new alternative service for crisis response that does not involve policing. You probably have seen a lot of media about this because I think in the last year and a half, this has been one of the key things that council has cared about. And so the reason this one is here on the systemic change piece is because really this is about council direction. It is again about rethinking a system. It is about us developing a very different model and approach. It's about culture change here in police, in community, and among Torontonians. And finally, it is about intergovernmental advocacy to build out a robust mental health and addiction support system for Torontonians so they're not in crisis calling a service all the time, but can get the supports that they actually need. And it's about evaluation and transparency and rebuilding public trust. Next slide, please. Okay, it's almost done. So I was asked to just talk about like, who the heck am I and how did I get here? And the funny thing is in doing this, I had to go back a little bit and you can laugh at me in my little 80s, 90s, 80s hairstyle. But I have been somebody who's always been involved in making things better. In school, I've always just thought that things could be better, especially for people who were experiencing discrimination and marginalization. So that's all, I think sometimes some things are hardwired, right? And that's been me. And I was really lucky in high school that I started to be recognized for the little things that I was doing, ended up in some right places, and got a lot of opportunities super early. But while I had a mandate for my life structurally, I went to Ottawa University and studied political science and women's studies, shifted to U of T in my 4th year. And I also did a master's of management, nonprofit management, so did that. And I ended up coming here on a 2-month contract, 2 months in 2004. And as I said, I never left. And so I never saw myself working in government. But when you find a place where you can live out your values, where for me, it's about learning, it's about contributing and having an impact, I actually didn't want to go anywhere else, and I haven't done that. And then finally, last slide. This is a set of jobs that are in my division because I think people often think when you come to this type of work, it really is either the community developer or it's the policy person. But there's a tons of jobs that are and careers, everything from the grant making to the the geographic, I'm a terrible person talking about planning issues, but we have planners within the division, to tech folks, to business analysts. All of those systems and skill sets are required to move the things that we do. And so again, I don't know who you are and what you're studying, but if there's an inkling of you that thinks public service might be a good place for your career, I really would encourage you to think about coming here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. That was fantastic. It's really an eye-opener to see the complexities of the systems that make it so easy when in terms of, or seem so easy rather, in terms of policies and programs that are put out by the city overall. So it's, to me at any rate, it is fascinating and mind-boggling to get an understanding of the work that is actually done prior to the programs and policies being released. So that was excellent, and I really appreciate the information from both you and Yolande. So we are going to basically heading into the Q&A stage. But before we do that, I would like to thank everyone for being here and to remind them that our next section on October 21st, we're going to be discussing community resilience. So there's a connection in terms of the building an equitable city. And so community resilience in terms of people, housing, and neighborhoods. So let us start with the Q&A. And I think there are a couple of questions in the chat. And then I will also do the questions for the live questions. Give me a minute, please. Oh, there we go. Okay, so, and if you don't mind, I would actually like to start off with a question. So, and so bear in mind with me. And the first question I have to ask has to do with not about the election necessarily, but about the representation in terms of council and its how it represents the needs of diverse communities. Kirk Winter, who was writing in the Lindsay Advocate in 2021 in October, stated that it is clear to many in media, politics, and academia that municipal councils do not reflect the people they govern, with most councils lacking a proportionate representation of racialized minorities, women, indigenous people, those living in poverty, those under the age of 40, members of the LGBTQ+ community. He also states that in Toronto, with 51.5% of the city identifying as visible minorities, the council elected in 2018 was 90% white. There is a clear disconnect between those who live in the communities and those who govern these communities. And what's also interesting is the City of Toronto states the city recognizes that building an inclusive workforce that reflects the population it serves at all levels within the Toronto Public Service, and that it will promote public confidence and ensure that the decision-making processes include a range of perspectives. So while that is true from the city perspective, and Winter makes the point, and not just about the City of Toronto, but other municipalities in Ontario. My question is, what is the city doing to ensure that there are better, more equitable representation at the council level? And are there any programs in place to ensure that there is much better representation? For instance, mentorships or even supporting fixed term limits. So either, I'm not sure who to direct the question to, but if that is either Denise or Yolande.
Shane, thank you.
Yep.
It's Yolande. Thank you for the question. I think Denise has some thoughts to share, but we've agreed I'll go first. That's a great question. And, at the end of your question, you mentioned a couple key pieces there around mentorship and terms in office. So that's starting off a good part of the discussion. Before I kind of get into the specific context in the City of Toronto, I do just want to share a couple thoughts on political accessibility broadly for groups that are underrepresented and equity deserving. I think it goes without saying that the crux of a lot of these issues comes down to resources and capacity. The long history of lack of access to and presence in political spaces by many groups, including Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving communities, obviously, compounds impact. So if we haven't been in certain spaces for a very long time, we're again going back to that diagram in my presentation about equality, equity, and justice. We're at a different starting place from the beginning when it comes to political access and representation. And I want to say, in keeping kind of what we're talking about, that a lot of the work to build political capacity in underrepresented groups has been done and is being advanced by community. I was a board member of the Jamaican Canadian Association for a very long time. We have a political capacity building program called So You Think You Can Run, which is meant to explicitly nurture and mentor and sponsor members of the Black community who are interested in seeking elected office, because we recognize that these barriers are there. There are other organizations doing that in the Black community. There are other organizations doing that in many other communities. So there's this environment that we're in where a lot of the access points, the work happening to push against those barriers is actually happening outside the political process and the political system. Now, when we talk about where we are here, this might be a random example, but I think of political representation in the same way as I think about procurement. So that's not a very exciting topic, but procurement in government context is basically just about the businesses, the vendors, whoever, the service provider that the city or any order of government works with to get services. Procurement processes in all orders of government have also historically been very white. But in recent years, governments have taken a more proactive stance to recognize that by implementing programs that are meant to specifically target and recruit Black business owners, Indigenous business owners, to create capacity building training so people understand procurement processes and how they work and what they need to do and how to prepare the right documentation for contracts and all this kind of stuff. So when I think about political representation, I think that that's a big frontier that we need to get past. Is there a more active initiative-taking role for government in creating these capacity building spaces that community traditionally has been taking on? I think that's a question that the city, as much as any other government, needs to ask ourselves in terms of what we can do. I think, the city clerk's office does a tremendous job in trying to ensure that the electoral process for the city of Toronto is as clear as possible, that documents are available in different formats, that people have the information that they need. But when we're talking about those really structural and systemic things, again, that come down to resources, a history of a lack of representation, a lack of capacity, we have to kind of go a step further and do that direct engagement, that direct outreach, that direct community building partnership to work with, I think, some of the organizations that are taking leadership in that space.
I think Yolande's answer was incredible, actually. So there are only a couple quick details to add in. One is that if we think more upstream here at the city, there is a diversity youth fellowship that has different components to it: Muslim youth, Indigenous youth, Black youth, and more. That is about getting young people into working in councillor offices and starting that political exposure even more so. The Toronto Youth Cabinet is also here for kids and young people 14 to 24 years old. And at this point, I would say they're hitting their 20-year mark, and some incredible system leaders have come through the TYC over its tenure. So if you know younger people, channel them to the TYC. And then I would also, there is a young women's, and I totally forget the name of the program, but there is a young women leadership mentorship program here as well, both with counselors and now with senior leader women in the organization, to also get more young people young women into our system, both inside and at the political level. And then I think lastly, I would say that it's also about the public appointments process, which has continued to really improve thanks to strategies and that equity priority of and reconciliation priority of city. But I would really encourage you and people that you know, we need diverse, incredible leadership on all the public bodies. They are publicly appointed. And that is one of the places too where people learn and get exposed and make connections and understand the system that could then parlay into a political career using the kinds of things that Yolande talked about.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to know that the programs and mentorship programs exist. That was fantastic. I will open the
Hi.
questions. Hello, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a quick question. To be a part of the DFA, what type of program or course or background would you require in order to be able to apply or look into it?
So I really appreciate that question, and you're not going to like my answer. It depends. It depends because there's so many paths. So let me just quickly pick a couple. If you were interested in work that is about working with residents directly, so being a community developer or an agency review officer, you're deciding who gets grants in the city and supporting agencies to build their capacity and deliver, or working with young people. So like, let's say that stream of work, I would say that it really helps if you have, yes, some formal education that's in some human service field, sure. But to be very honest, in my 18 years here, I shouldn't say this in an education forum, but education matters. Please, please, please. I have a master's, please do education. It matters. However, lived experience really matters too, and life, like work experience or volunteer experience really matters. And the reason is because you see the work is complex. We're underfunded constantly, and so people have to hit the ground running. So it helps that you have knowledge of the community in some fashion, that you volunteered in an organization or worked in a community organization or some institution in that setting. Professional educational expertise is obviously really an important bonus because it helps if you're doing the staff that's in the research side of our division. They come with credentials. They need those credentials in order to do what they do. We also invest in training and continued growth and learning. So it really depends. And I would say that the best thing that you can do for yourself is have the education, have experience in community or in institutions, have some work experience, even if it's volunteering. I make no distinction to this day between paid and unpaid things on my resume, so I'd say you do the same. And then if like personally connect in with the types of things that are happening in the city, because having a perspective and a lived experience about it is also really helpful. And when people interview here, we look at all three things.
Can I sort of ask a question about that, Denise?
Yes.
And sorry, and when students look at jobs and job listings, and they look at the list of qualifications, and sorry, not just students, but when people, marginalized people, BIPOC people, et cetera, who have had limited experiences as a result of structural challenges, when they look at all the list of qualifications, it becomes very overwhelming. How is that addressed in terms of the city? Because they're pretty much say, okay, I don't qualify for half the things that I see.
Right. No, I can certainly appreciate that. And I think sometimes it's harder depending on the fields as well. So I would say that especially for those who are in college and university, or even if you're not, I spend a lot of time, as I imagine Yolande and many people here at the city, responding to informational interviews from people who want to understand more about what do we actually do on a day-to-day basis. And I think just back to the last question, getting more guidance in relation to your particular interest and experience. So don't be afraid to like reach out and I think Yolanda and I are putting our hands up, we have to because we're here, but to reach out and ask and have those kinds of conversations, I think that that's number one. Number two, there is a movement within like HR, certainly here at the city and in other institutions, to only look for the things that you actually need. So there's no point in something, and that's why I was candid about like experience to us matters as much and often way more than education, formal education, because there's no point in pushing people towards credentials if like from as a job, like if it's just going to be a job barrier and it has little relevancy to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And now again, I fully support education, but I also just want to reinforce that the work experience and the volunteer experience matters when you come into organizations that are about hitting the ground running. So don't underestimate that if you can. And we also have programs that are about mentorship, especially for foreign trained professionals, newcomers, et cetera, because we recognize that there are structural barriers there and we want to help people have that first shot in. And for us to be able to see beyond the general pool that we sometimes can attract, we're spending more time as an organization across the board, going into communities, advertising differently, building relationships with organizations and communities because we need to diversify not only our workforce, but we also need like broader skill sets for many of the things that we're trying to do. If you keep doing the same things with the same set of tools, we all know that saying goes. So we're trying to have different perspective, different skills, different experiences in the organization so we can approach problems and solutions differently.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, if I can just jump in on Denise's answer as well. I let Denise and Yolande do all the heavy lifting with the presentations, and I'm just coming for the fun part of Q's and A's. But having joined the city in 2019, I can speak to my own experience a little bit. I know a lot of the city job descriptions, they had so many bullet points. So it was everything in the kitchen sink. So I wasn't even sure what every job was. And I know statistically, we've seen that often racialized people, particularly women, tend to not put their foot in the door if they don't have 100% or 90% of those criteria met. But often, as Denise said, that's not all required. Like, you know, there's a basic level or baseline of what you actually really need to do the job. So I would really encourage folks, when something is of interest, as Denise said, reach out to someone and have an informational interview, whether it's on LinkedIn or if you have networks or contacts, and actually get a good sense of what that job looks like, and then to put your hat in the ring. The worst case scenario is you end up in the exact same position that you're already in, but you at least now you have, you know, you've made a contact. People know your name, people know who you are. And I would say from mine, I also, like Denise, I also have a master's, but when I was starting, I was competing against people who had years of experience against me. So I just wanted to get my foot in the door. I was applying to admin positions, such as file, to staple papers, but I went in with enthusiasm. I put my hand up for every opportunity when there was work to be done and people didn't want to do it. I put my hand up, and then, you know, you start to, like, you know, people start to recognize you, people start to recognize your efforts, and then that's also how you build your network. So I would say, I never thought any job was beneath me, so I would put my foot forward, but also be confident in the skills and lived experiences that you have, and toss your hat in the ring. Even if you're like, I only have 60% of what they're asking for, 60% is still really good, and maybe you can learn the rest. So I think a growth mindset is really, really key in any job, to be able to learn and grow, because the jobs don't remain the same over time.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question in the Q&A, and it's from Leslie Wee of George Brown. And this question is there an official poverty line adopted for the city of Toronto? And if so, how does it compare to other poverty lines, federal and provincial?
That's a very good question, and you're going to test my ability to know what it is, which I don't know. But But yes, the city, we have a 20-year poverty reduction strategy, and Councillor Mihevik is in the room, who was one of the instigators of that work. We're in, I think, year 7 or something like that. So we do have a rate that we consider as being below poverty. It aligns actually with most systems. I don't know it off the top of my head, and my apologies, I once did. But I can certainly give you that particular information offline if that's all right. Oh, in 2 weeks, that's one of the topics, says Councillor Mihevik. So you're good. You'll get a very specific answer then. But I would say, though, that there is some discongruity across systems in looking at poverty for sure. And, you know, again, having lived experience advisory and community experts who are working on these things day in and day out is constantly challenging us to think about not just like the bare minimum, but what do people actually need to be part of the prosperity of the city, which is why the original plan is called To Prosperity.
Okay, thank you, Denise. I think we have time for one more question. I don't know if there's anyone on the floor.
Does this work? Hello? Does this work? Okay, yeah. So, sorry, this is going to be a little long. I have a little context and then a little story and then the question, but the answer might be short. I don't know. So this is in terms of equity on our roads. If you've ever walked or driven downtown when the lights are green, and often when they are red, it's a bit of a free-for-all, and this creates a lot of dangerous situations. And people with the largest, most dangerous vehicles have the greatest responsibility for the safety of others. No one wants to help each other, and everyone is your enemy. Traffic is so bad that any other person on the road is your problem because they are a part of traffic. So last week, I witnessed a road rage incident where a cement truck driver knocked over the scooter of a food courier after he parked it on the side of the road. He then blocked the road for every car and 2 full streetcars to get in a yelling match with this courier. He then got out of his cement truck, grabbed the courier by his jacket, and held a hammer high above his head, ready to strike. And this was a very terrifying moment, but he didn't hit him. Everyone yelled for him to stop, and I think he realized he was being an insane person, so he let him go. So I see this kind of violence more and more in the news, and I think we're at a tipping point in Toronto's road design where we need radical change. And I don't know if this kind of assault or nearly murder is something that could be prevented with what the Equity Division does, but my question is, how do you think situations like this could be prevented with more equitable roads downtown, and especially throughout the farthest reaches of the city like Rexdale, where it's so much harder to live without a car and easier to find yourself in dangerous situations in simple things like crossing the road?
Thanks so much for that question and for raising the issue. And sorry that you had to witness that incident. Of course, I'm sure it was quite difficult for the person experiencing it. So thanks for bringing it forward. So I'm not super versed in this, but I do want to mention Cycle-to. The City of Toronto does have a cycling strategy or recognition that there is inequity on city roads and that there needs to be something done to address presence of cyclists as well as cars beyond bike lanes, because as you mentioned, folks are kind of doing their own thing, doing what they want to do in those scenarios. I think a big part of that, based on what I know, is that there's a network around planning, like from an urban planning perspective, thinking about a roadmap for the city in the same way that we think about urban planning and infrastructure for roads, homes, and everything else. It needs to have that level of, I guess, due diligence and strategy when it comes to cycling, so that, like everything else that we've been talking about today, it's not an adjunct to the status quo. It's just part of the way that the city operates from a planning perspective. But I think, Janice, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, if I could just add to that point. Well, I don't want to preempt. I see on October 21st, you have a community resilience presentation that is public health, housing, and transportation. So the transportation folks themselves might be able to better speak to answer that. But I will say, from a more corporate or centralized perspective, our team works quite closely with the transportation team, and I will give a shout out to our colleagues in transportation because they've developed a lot of like overlaid an equity lens onto a lot of their work, and they're starting to think about the exact like scenarios and situations that you're bringing up and talking about, recognizing that historically a lot of that lens hasn't been applied to it, which is resulting in where we are today and the incident that you witnessed. So I think they're very mindful of a lot of these things and how can we make Toronto safer, not only for people behind the wheel, people who are cycling, people who are pedestrians, thinking about lighting on the roads at night, thinking about where you're placing bus shelters. So really overlaying that equity lens onto the transportation, both the infrastructure side as well as the experiential side. So I know that work is underway, but certainly I think our colleagues in transportation will be able to maybe provide more specific data and examples about how they're advancing that for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We are at 10:59, and I believe we are going to wrap up the session. This has been a very fascinating and very informative session, especially in terms of equity and creating equitable solutions for the city. So just as a reminder that our next session is on October 21st, and we're going to be discussing community resilience, people, housing, and neighborhoods. It's been my pleasure to host as moderator. For those of you celebrating Thanksgiving, enjoy, and in general, enjoy the long weekend. Take care of yourselves, everyone.